Hello everyone. Today we're looking at the chapter Online Communion. Rowan Williams writes, "The online Eucharist helps us to open our eyes more fully to those around us, who for whatever reason feel unable to worship in the church building and yet have wanted to learn and join in the Christian faith online. This new inclusivity brought about by the pandemic surely has a place in the future of God's people, if we are to continue to truly share the good news of God's love to all. The idea that we must take communion every week is a relatively new idea. Yes, it affirms the common life we experience together in the Holy Spirit. However, in both the Western and Eastern churches, well into the 20th century, relatively few people took communion regularly. Instead, people attended their local church to gaze at the redemptive work of Christ, to worship and give thanks. So perhaps the Eucharist does not have to be central to every act of worship. Williams has found that the pandemic has led to the experience of concentrating on what he calls spiritual communion, of quieting oneself down to focus on the great gift of God in Jesus, to be absolutely present in the moment, in our own homes. Williams reminds us that this experience brings home the truth that our common life in and out of church depends simply on what God in Jesus has done for us. Father Richard Rohr tells us that in order to gain a new understanding of the world in times of great uncertainty, we have to proceed by waiting and by the practice of attentiveness. When we don't know the future, we have to wait patiently for the gaps to be filled in. This can take some time, and for me, who doesn't do patience very well, it's difficult. However, through the practice of regular contemplation, I've found a way of seeing and a way of experiencing life in the moment. It helps me to just live each day at a time, rather than necessarily worrying about how many more months of pandemic we have to get through. By engaging in contemplative practices, such as sitting quietly, resting in God, we can practice moving beyond ourselves, beyond our need for certainty and control. Engaging in a contemplative sit, as Richard Rohr puts it, requires us to first acknowledge that we will experience a flow of momentary thoughts, a subconscious to-do list, if you like. By learning to let go, we choose to enter a prayerful time of silence that quiets our mind and helps us to open ourselves to what we don't know. As we engage our whole body, we become more aware of our inner emotions and thoughts. And gradually, we become more aware of God's presence. As Rowan Williams infers, such practices have been around for a long time, from the Desert Fathers and Mothers onto Celtic spirituality, from Mr. Eckhart and the Cloud of Unknowing to Julian of Norwich. And then Thomas Merton and Thomas Keating reintroduced the ideas to a 20th century audience. Merton and Keating's teaching helps us to learn to experience unity with God in the moment, rather than merely cognitive knowledge about God. I think this is the way forward for faithful people in the 21st century. Contemplation, or spiritual communion, as Rowan Williams puts it, helps us to look out onto the world with a humble attitude of accepting that we will never fully know, that there will always be more to see, more to learn, and more ways to experience God. But instead of growing despondent at this awareness, contemplation helps us to live in the moment, rather than worry about tomorrow. In other words, living as Jesus did. Cynthia Bourgoul suggests that the kingdom of heaven is a metaphor for a state of consciousness. I'm excited about this because metaphor helps me to bring God closer in my life today. For God's kingdom is inside each one of us. When we look at others, we are seeing God. And we also find God in creation, in everything around us.